Hello, class. So today we are going to be focusing on two chapters in Beloved, chapters 10 and 11. I'm going to quickly go over both chapters and then I'm going to give you your assignment for today. So, chapter 10 focuses on Paul D and his time in Alfred Prison. So this chapter is dedicated entirely to Paul D's experiences in an escape from Alfred Prison. So Paul D remembers how after Setha had escaped slavery, a school teacher had sold him to Brandywine, who was another slave owner who Paul D had tried to kill. Paul D is imprisoned with 46 other men, and they are kept in boxes and dirt trenches and wear leg irons, which are connected by, quote, the best hand-forged chain in Georgia. The time that Paul D spends at Alfred Prison is very graphically depicted in Beloved. The prisoners are sexually abused by the three white jail wardens. And Paul D is there 86 days when all of a sudden it starts to rain continuously for 8 days straight. The prisoners are chained together and then locked up in their boxes until the rain stops. And then their boxes become flooded because of the continual rain, and the muddy terrain allows for their boxes to be easily broken. So because of the rain, the prisoners escape, but they do remain chained together. The prisoners come to a camp of sick Cherokee who then free the slaves from their chains. All of the Alfred prisoners go their separate ways over the course of several weeks, but in the end, Paul D is the last one to leave the camp, and he is told by the Cherokee there to follow the tree flowers north because he wanted to go north where he could be free. So he travels to Delaware and spends 18 months with the woman who houses him. There's a couple of quotes that I wanted to look at in this particular chapter. This one here, and I wanted to pair it with this particular image. It says, when he turned his head, aiming for a last look at brother, turned it as much as the rope that connects his neck to the axle of the buckboard allowed. And later on, when they fastened the iron around his ankles and clamped the wrists as well, there was no outward sign of trembling at all. So I thought that this image here paired nicely with this particular quote. As you can see, these boards here were what prisoners were kept in as they were moved from one place to the next. It's a pretty powerful image. This other section here I thought was really wonderful because Morrison's use of personification when she's talking about life and death and how they reacted to it, especially slaves during this time, is especially powerful. So the quote reads, and they beat the women for having known them and no more, no more, the children for having been them but never again. They killed a boss so often and so completely they had to bring him back to life to pulp him one more time. Tasting hot meal cake among pine trees, they beat it away. Singing love songs to Mr. Death, they smashed his head. More than the rest, they killed the flirt, whom folks called life, for leading them on, making them think the next sunrise would be worth it, that another stroke of time would do it at last. Only when she was dead would they be safe. The successful ones, the ones who had been there enough years to have maimed, mutilated, maybe even buried her, kept watch over the others who were still in her cock-teasing hug, caring and looking forward, remembering and looking back. They were the ones whose eyes said, "Help me, it's bad," or "Look out," meaning this might be the day I bay or eat my own mess or run. And it was this last that had to be guarded against, for if one pinched and ran, all 46 would be yanked by the chain that bound them, and no telling who or how many would be killed. A man could risk his own life, but not his brothers. So the eyes said, "Steady now, and hang by me." Life was dead. The imagery there of what these people dealt with, the idea that life is a person that they had to beat because life was so misleading for them, it's very, very powerful. Moving on to chapter 11, I titled this chapter, "She Moved Him." Again, this chapter favors the perspective of Paul D. He describes himself as moving out of 124, but he is moving unwillingly. He finds that he no longer wants to share a room with Setha. Instead, he prefers at first sleeping in the rocking chair downstairs, then in baby Suggs' bed, and then finally he ends up in the storeroom. As he shifts from place to place, he realizes the moving is involuntary. He isn't being nervous, he is being prevented. It is inferred that he knew who was moving him when the narrator states that he waited. My question to you, class, is to think about this, like, what was he waiting for? Who was he waiting for? He knows, he has an idea or this concept that it is beloved who is moving him. What do you think that he's thinking? What is he waiting for exactly? One night, beloved visits Paul D in the storeroom. She says, "Setha don't love me like I love her. I don't love nobody but her." What motivates beloved to sleep with Paul D? What do you think? What do you think brings her to Paul D? Okay. The next slide is going to go over a couple of things. The first is this idea of the rusted tin tobacco can. It's a very powerful symbol that plays throughout the text, and it's specifically related to Paul D. This quote here says, "She moved closer with a footfall he didn't hear, and he didn't hear the whisper that the flakes of rust made either, as they fell away from the seams of his tobacco tin. So when the lid gave, he didn't know it. What he knew was that when he reached the inside part, he was saying, 'Red heart, over and over again. Softly and then so loud it woke Denver, then Paul D himself. 'Red heart, red heart, red heart.'" Now, first of all, it's important to recognize that in this quote, he is describing that he did eventually sleep with beloved. And during this act, he himself was not awake, because it says here, "Softly, then so loud, it woke Denver, then Paul D himself." So he might have been in some type of trance-like state. Okay. One thing I wanted to point out was this red heart being repeated. I got this idea, of course, from the movie The Shining, if anyone's seen that. The little boy says, "Red rum." Okay, now that spells murder backwards. So because I'm such a nerd with words and stuff, I thought, what would happen if I spelled red heart backwards? So I spelled it backward, and it looked like traitor, okay, or traitor. How are the two people involved in this act, beloved and Paul D, how are they being traitors? Who are they being traitors to? I think that's something that's very interesting for you guys to consider. The other thing here is that beloved is being portrayed as a succubus. Hopefully you are all familiar with that term. A succubus is a lowland demon in female form or supernatural entity in folklore that appears in dreams and takes the form of a woman in order to seduce men, usually through sexual activity. So the male counterpart is the incubus. Religious traditions hold that repeated sexual activity with a succubus may result in the deterioration of health, mental state, or even death. So here the idea is, or it's inferred or alluded to, that beloved sleeps with Paul D in order to eventually kill him, probably, which would then secure a greater or stronger relationship between her and Setha. So those are the two chapters. This is your writing prompt I'd like for you to work through today. Both chapters 10 and 11 are told from Paul D's perspective. So chapter 10 focuses on Paul D's imprisonment, while chapter 11 focuses on Paul D finally succumbing to Beloved's spell, so her physically moving him out of 124 and her seduction of him. The central theme of chapter 10 is obvious, which is imprisonment, both mental and physical. While it might not be obvious, the theme of chapter 11 is also imprisonment, but an imprisonment of a different kind. Consider the concept of imprisonment or enslavement in these two chapters. How do they differ, and how are they similar? So please write at least 2 paragraphs discussing the theme of imprisonment in these 2 chapters. Please use quotes from these chapters to support your discussion. So a hint here is write 1 paragraph on chapter 10 and 1 on chapter 11. So don't simply restate what happens in the chapters. Focus on the idea of imprisonment and how it affects Paul D and how he reacts to it. Okay. Now in chapter 10, it's obvious. He's in a prison. He's a prisoner. He's imprisoned. But there's also a mental type of imprisonment going on there. But then with chapter 11, who is imprisoned in chapter 11? It's Paul D again, right? So who is his prison, or who is imprisoning him? Okay. So think about that, and please write your response by hand and submit it at the end of class. Okay? Have a good day.